August 25th, 2005. I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. Tonight, the story of a suspected terrorist held for almost 2 months in solitary confinement in the same prison as Saddam Hussein. He was an American citizen, a Navy veteran, and he was innocent.
And I said, I have the right to an attorney. Do you have attorneys here in Iraq? And I remember the agent going, no. And I said, I have the right to remain silent. And he said, yeah, but the last guy who wanted to remain silent is still in prison 2 years later in Afghanistan.
Getting cleared by the FBI was only the first step to getting out of prison.
What I suspect was the problem was no one wanting to make a decision, no one wanting to put their necks out on the line so that in case I'm released and come back to LA and suddenly a building blows up, that official who signed the release form doesn't get fired.
Tonight, 55 days, one American's lesson in the slow wheels of justice. Often, a rational lie is more convincing than the foolish truth. Last night, we introduced you to Cyrus, whose truthful story sounded so far-fetched that he ended up being held for almost 2 months in the same prison camp that holds Saddam Hussein. Some quick background for those of you who may have missed the first part of our story. Cyrus was born in Iran, came to the United States when he was 5. He served in the U.S. Navy. He supports the war in Iraq. For 3 years now, he's worked on a documentary about Cyrus the Great, who lived 500 years before Christ, and who, as the ruler of an enormous Persian empire, was one of history's first champions of human rights. You can question Cyrus judgment, but he was in Iraq legally. He had written permission to shoot part of his film in a section of Iraq that used to be known as Babylon. When his Iraqi taxi was stopped and searched at a police checkpoint, a bag full of washing machine timers was found in the trunk. Similar devices have been used to set off roadside bombs, so it made sense that the driver, Cyrus and his Iranian cameraman were arrested. Carr was taken into custody May 17th. On that same day, the Iraqi taxi driver admitted that the timers were his. Everything else about Carr checked out. Nevertheless, he was transferred from Tikrit to Abu Ghraib prison, and from Abu Ghraib to the U.S. military prison at Camp Cropper, where he would be held in solitary confinement for 53 days. You are an American citizen, you are in American hands. You, at some point or another, ask for someone from the embassy to come visit you, right?
Yes.
You ask whether your family can be notified where you are.
Yes.
You ask whether you can contact your senator.
Barbara Boxer.
Barbara Boxer. And what happens as you make these requests?
It was 4 days after arriving at Camp Cropper that the FBI came to interrogate me.
Did they identify themselves as the FBI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they had badges that said that they were.
Okay.
And they were in civilian clothes. And they said, they put a piece of paper in front of me and they said, these are your rights. So I started reading them, that I have the right to remain silent, that I have the right to an attorney. And I said, I have the right to an attorney? Do you have attorneys here in Iraq? And I remember the agent going, no. And I said, I have the right to remain silent? And he said, yeah, but the last guy who wanted to remain silent is still in prison 2 years later in Afghanistan. And I said, look, I want to do everything I can to cooperate with you, to help you clear me as fast as possible, as soon as possible. And he goes, will you give us permission to search your house? I said, sure.
In California?
In Los Angeles, right. And he said, will you give us permission to search your car? I said, sure. He said, willing to take a lie detector test? I said, yeah. And I said, can I just call my family to let them know I'm okay, I'm alive? And they said, I'm sorry, we can't let you do that right now. And he asked me if I was registered to vote in California, and I said, yeah, I was. He said, who'd you vote for in the last election? And I balked for a minute because I realized suddenly what a political prisoner must feel like. And then I also knew that they could probably check and find out. And I told him I voted for John Kerry. But I immediately qualified that by saying, well, I voted for him for his domestic policy, which is true. But I voted, but I agree with George Bush's foreign policy, which is also true. I did support the invasion of Iraq. I believe that this was a good war. I think they pretty much knew at the end of the interrogation, they call it an interview, that I was who I said I was, because their whole demeanor became much more friendly than when I first went into the room. And they shook my hand as I left. So I was assuming that they at least suspected that I am who I said I am. And at that point, I left, and 2 days later...
When you say you left, you were taken to a cell?
I was taken back to solitary confinement.
Right.
And 2 days later, the International Committee of the Red Cross comes to visit me. And it was really a stroke of luck because they don't come very often. And they registered me, and they asked me, do you want us to notify your embassy? I said, yes. I've been trying to notify them for a week now. And I told them, you know, my sister works for the ICRC, and they said, really? What's her name? I said, oh, it's Anna Carr. And she goes, I know Anna. And I said, well, yeah. So she told my sister that where I was, and that was the first time that anyone in my family was notified that I was still alive.
In the meantime, the FBI searched Carr's apartment in Los Angeles, took his computer and documents. In early June, the agent handling Carr's case left this voicemail for his relatives.
He's in custody, he's fine, it's just that we're just trying to get his release. So I'll let you know anything I find out, I'll let you know. So just have to be patient, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Okay? Take care.
That was about the time Carr submitted what is called a facility request form. As a citizen of the United States, he wrote, I would like to exercise my right to speak to a representative of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I have made the same request on 3 other occasions at the Palawada detention facility. To which came this response. Forwarded your request to speak with a member of the embassy. Commandant Carol Haas. So it's 8 days after you've been arrested, but it will be another 47 days before you're released. The FBI at this point has searched your car, searched your house, interrogated you.
Taken a lie detector test.
Which you passed?
He told me right there, I detect no deception.
Okay. So you've passed the lie detector test. What took so damn long? I mean, I suspect that's a question you've asked yourself.
I have. One government official in one of the articles that I read said that he could sum it up in one word: bureaucracy. And I think it's something a bit more insidious. I teach management, so I think I have a bit of authority to say this. And what I suspect was the problem was no one wanting to make a decision, no one wanting to put their necks out on the line, so that in case I'm released and come back to LA and suddenly a building blows up, that official who signed the release form doesn't get fired from or demoted in rank.
Doing nothing, in other words, has fewer possible negative consequences than doing something.
Exactly.
So a lot of people did nothing for
55 days.
55 days, which must have seemed like an eternity to you. To most of us who lead our normal lives, 55 days, almost a couple of months, doesn't seem that long. So give me a sense of how long it seemed to you.
Well, certainly solitary confinement can make days drag on. But mostly what it was really the feeling of abandonment and betrayal by my own government. Because I was wondering where the U.S. Embassy was. And I was thinking, you know, I'm being interrogated by the FBI. I'm appealing for help to the U.S. Embassy. And I'm thinking, well, I'm stuck here, and there's no way. I really believed, Ted, that had I been, you know, a French citizen, that the French embassy would have protested to the Secretary of State, and, you know, some diplomatic wheels would have turned and I would have been out. But I felt for the first time it a liability to be a U.S. citizen. Because I didn't know who to turn to. And that was really what I was struggling with more than just the time.
Are you thinking of suing anybody?
No.
Because?
Well, because I don't think it would change policy, because it's really not coming out of their pockets, it's coming out of the taxpayer pocket. Their budget remains the same. Had it been a private company, you're darn right, I would have sued. I don't blame them for detaining us. I would have done the same thing, honestly, and I wouldn't have it any other way, because it certainly jeopardizes the lives of our men and women in uniform just as much as the wanton violence does. Is if you're willy-nilly by letting people go, it's just as bad as being willing or reckless with violence when you have them. But there has to be a balance, a happy medium there somewhere, I'm hoping.
On June 14th, day 29, he sent this facility request form. Dear Lieutenant Colonel, I have been held without being charged for almost 1 month now. I have been patient and compliant, yet I sit here, fate unknown. I now officially and for the record request a lawyer. I demand my right, as bestowed on me by the United States Constitution, to either be charged or released immediately. And please provide me with an attorney immediately. Thank you. Cyrus Carr, number 174. 7 days later, he received this response. Forwarded your request to higher command. Commandant Carol Haas. It had been more than 4 weeks since the FBI interrogated Carr, administered a lie detector test, and searched his apartment in Los Angeles. A third facility request form sent June 22, 2005, day 37. Since arriving in the U.S. in 1966 as an infant, I have found American people to be some of the most kind and just people of all the societies in which I've lived. It is a benevolent nation. Even the most ardent conservatives root for the underdog and are quick to acknowledge injustice. The disillusionment of this truth has been by far the hardest part of my incarceration. As an independent filmmaker on his last dime and a shoestring budget, I am an underdog. It has been 1 month since anyone from intelligence or anyone else has talked to me. Every month that I'm detained, I take a step closer to financial ruin. Please provide me with an intelligence update and with counsel. Thank you for your continued understanding and consideration. Cyrus Carr, number 174. 6 days later, this response from Lieutenant Colonel Haas: forwarded your request to the investigators. It was on his 49th day in custody that Cyrus Carr was finally granted a hearing at the Camp Victory Courthouse. After 15 minutes of deliberation, the board reached its ruling. Carr was an innocent civilian, and he was led back to his cell. 2 days later, the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, working with Carr's family, filed a writ of habeas corpus. It named the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of the Army. 4 more days passed. Carr and his cameraman were released July 10th, the day before the ACLU case was scheduled to be heard in court. How would you describe your own feelings now? Angry, hurt, frustrated?
No. I believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and I believe that's what makes an American. And I have a big flag that hangs over my bed, which symbolizes that very belief. And so, no, I have full confidence that the pillars that our society is built on will prevail, but they're non-existent in Iraq. And I think if we're going to lead by example, I mean, if we're going to institute democracy in Iraq, I think we should lead by example. The problem with this kind of reckless hostility is that I think it creates exponential damage, because it's not just the person that's being detained who's now disgruntled. It's his father, it's his brother, it's his cousin, it's his sons. By one wrong detainee, you've angered many people. And I hope that there's a mid-course correction in our policy there. I believe that liberating the people of Iraq from Saddam Hussein and his evil 2 sons was a good war. But now, I guess the lesson I've learned is that we have good wars, we have bad wars, and we have good wars conducted badly. And I hope that, you know, we can just treat people with civility. I think it will really save a lot of lives.
I'll be back in a moment with a closing thought. Cyrus Carr and his cameraman are free. The taxi driver remains in custody. The U.S. military has no public reservations about how the case was handled. A spokesman for coalition forces, Brigadier General Don Alston, said, "This case highlights the effectiveness of our detainee review process. We followed well-established procedures. Mr. Carr was treated fairly and humanely, consistent with the standards set by the Geneva Conventions. "We understand," said General Alston, "this has been difficult for Mr. Carr and his family. However, we owe the coalition forces, Iraqi security forces, and Iraqi civilians a thorough investigation, especially when the circumstances relate to serious and potentially dangerous activity." End quote. All of which makes perfectly good sense. It does not explain, however, why an American citizen was denied access to an attorney, to a representative of the U.S. Embassy, or why for days he was denied permission to communicate with his family and was never permitted to communicate with his senator. Nor has anyone explained why it took so many weeks after the FBI confirmed Carr's story to set him free. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.